All right, folks, welcome. Comic Book Talk, Comic Book Wednesday. I am Pops. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Hope you're enjoying the comic book conversation. And like always, please hit that chat, hit that comment section. Tell us about some of the things that you want to talk about, things that you're reading that you're enjoying, maybe somebody you want to have on. Just throw out all that stuff. We love having that interaction. And I have a great guy. I mean, this is a guy that I'm supporting, that I've been reading, that I've been following. Basically, we kind of like in the Nexus era when he started was literally with around the time that I was like in my heyday of doing all this stuff and getting into this. Aaron Lopresti, my friend, thank you so much for making time for me.
Hey, well, Pops, thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to having a conversation with you. This is exciting.
Yeah, it's so cool, man. You kind of kicked off in the 90s back when I was, that's the explosion was happening. The big two were going crazy, but of course, once Image added to the mix as a fan, as a reader, that was my Nexus era. I had like a little flea market comic book store. I couldn't afford like a, brick and mortar, but I was churning and burning comic books and stuff like that. And I remember, you had stuff with Mirage before you ended with the big two, and later on you were at CrossGen, stuff like that. So it's so cool to see you among this crowd of creators, which to me are these big name creators. I know maybe some of these you wouldn't know that listening to the people that are still at the big two, but for me, these are the people that I grew up reading and enjoying a lot, and being able to find your legs and find some fun doing it on your own.
Well,
Was that?
I think you get to a point where you start to look around and you realize that you're not getting any younger, and you're thinking, well, I've been doing this for 25 or 30 years, and what do I have to show for it other than the paycheck I got every time I turned in a story? But nothing beyond that. And it's like we all have ideas, and I happen to have a ton of unpublished IPs sitting around that are developed, but I've never did anything with them. And I was always like, oh yeah, I'll do something with them eventually. And then you start realizing, you know what? I'm running out of time here. I better do something with these if I'm ever going to do anything with them. And so that's kind of, I think, not just me, but I think a lot of the creators you're referring to sort of looked at that situation and went, I gotta do my own thing. And then through crowdfunding, that when that became a viable option for doing these things, suddenly it sort of freed up a lot of people to take that chance.
Has it been a little strange to transition into also like the YouTube personality part of it? Because you really kind of have the crowdfunding part for comics really took on its own life also, because in the YouTube sphere of things, having your own channel, really having almost like a face to face with your audience. I mean, yeah, you may not be seeing the chat, but the chat seeing you and interacting with you. Now you do that with your spouse and these amazing streams with Shelly. It's just it's such a radical difference than, oh, by the way, Aaron, here's this script. We need these pages done, or we need you to turn in little stories. And it's so radically different. What was that transition like making that move?
Um, it was for me, it wasn't so much being afraid to get in front of the camera because I've done speaking engagements, I've done panels, I've done seminars. Um, you know, I took acting all the way up through high
Mm,
school. So, being in front of a crowd was not necessarily a big deal for me. But what my biggest concern was having some sort of content that people actually wanted to
mm,
watch, right? Your biggest fear is maybe not necessarily, oh, how am I on camera, but what am I offering to this
mm,
audience so that they're either going to accept it or reject it, and that was the thing with me is I I didn't know what to do. Right. And I knew I had to start YouTubing to sort of get an audience built up in this independent market, but I really wasn't sure what I could do that would be entertaining to somebody or make them want to tune in. And when I first started doing it, I started right before the pandemic. But most of the time I just drew. I would
hmm
talk
hmm
and draw
Live
like I was
stream
at a
draw
convention,
sessions.
and I would put
Hmm
on online conventions that I would go for like 3 days and go 8 hours a day, like at a convention, and just kind of talk and draw. And then as things went along, and you mentioned the show I do Sundays with Shelly, my wife, at on Sunday afternoons. I started thinking I don't want to do what everybody else is doing because I'm not as good at being a talk show host like, say, Ethan. I think Ethan Van Sciver, I think, is really good.
hmm
He has a good voice. I think he does a really good job, and I'm like, I can't do that. But what I can do is take some of my, uh, film school background, some, like I said, some of the acting background, and do like little video clips and do different things and do more like a variety show. And I don't know if that'll work or not, but that's what we've been doing. And it's slowly been gaining an audience. We don't hit the big controversies and get into, you know,
The
uh,
drama.
yeah, drama and criticism and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. So it's not that immediate high energy draw. I think that people that do that get that kind of a response immediately. It's more of a slow build, but I think we've got um, a loyal following that is slowly growing, and we just keep doing what we're doing, and hopefully that'll be good enough in the long run. We'll see.
Well, and you're tapping into who Aaron is, right? You're tapping
Yeah.
into who your genuine self is. I mean, I love your show with James Mealy,
Mm.
Sequential Treasures, who does a show once a month with me. We try to point out a great comic book, a single book, because it's like, yeah, I've clipped him now. He probably doesn't know this. I'm going to clip it and try to figure out how to put it as an intro of him saying, sure, it's easy to bash on all this stuff that's terrible, and there's a place for that, but we should also try to give them something good so they'll know what to go read.
Right.
And that is definitely, and I'm sure you're familiar with Gary at Nerdrotic, but
Hmm.
I'm like the flea market version of Gary, where I've been flooded and inundated with people that are noobs. They're in this fandom and in this circle of entertainment where they really love comic books. Maybe they read them before or whatever, but now because there's been so many massive events and reboots, most people are just confused. They don't know where to jump in. They don't know what
Hmm.
they should read. They don't know how to do things. Crowdfunding is definitely filling a gap for that. But, there's only so much, Aaron and Shelley can do, so there's going to be some time gaps there where people have some other needs that they want to have fulfilled. And it's like, well, what do I read? And James has been a great, gap filler with that. Cause like yourself, man, you guys tap into like this plethora of information, and you, you are a fan, dude. Right. That is
Yeah.
like one
Oh
of the
yeah.
coolest parts of this, right? Is most of you guys, as I've gotten to know some of you, have been able to, talk to Mike Barron and Graham and Dan Lawless and some different folks. Like, what's fun is I'm a fan. I'm talking to another fan. I mean, sure, you're a
Hmm.
professional artist and writer and creator, but it's like we're also fans of this. Like we really can just wax about our love of it.
Right, and I think maybe some of that is missing in current mainstream comics, that you got guys
Mhm.
that are, writers and artists, and not all of them, but
Of
there's
course.
some in there that aren't real necessarily fans of the medium. They're just, it's a job, or maybe they have aspirations to, use it as a stepping stone to get someplace else. And I think it makes a big difference, because you sort of, if you're a fan of it and you grew up being a fan of it. I mean, I just loved comics when I was a kid, and it makes you protect the industry a little bit, because you have that history and you remember what it used to be like. And I think that's what's motivating a lot of us that are doing independent comics right now, whether that's CG or not. It's this love of comics and what we remember in our youth. And my youth was quite a bit longer ago than some of the other guys, that were
Mhm.
90s kids or whatever. And, they grew up on Image, but I grew up in the 70s. And as not only a reader but a collector.
Mhm.
When I found that first price guide, I think in a bookstore in 1976, I was 12 years old, and it dawned on me, oh my gosh, these are not only really cool, but they have value. And
Mm.
so then I would go back and search old bookstores and things like that, because we didn't have comic shops back then, to find back issues, right? And started, so I spent every dime I made from, until I was 16 years old on comic books. I mean, absolutely every dime. Once I got a car, that changed, of course. But before that, I was collecting. I was collecting for value, or at least my perception of value at the time. I was collecting, I wanted everything Marvel. I wasn't much of a DC guy. I was very much a Marvel zombie, and I read the DC monster books, and that was about it. But yeah, I had a huge collection growing up, and I read all of those books, and they were an important part of my growing up, not in the sense that it, shaped who I became, but in terms of entertainment and the kind of, when I think back on the fun and nostalgia I had as a kid, a lot of it in circles comics in some way, shape, or form. Comics or film. Those are the things that
Mhm.
were great interest to me. And being an artist, I was naturally attracted to the art aspect of the comic books. If I hadn't been an artist, I don't know that comics would have had the same appeal to me. We had a whole group of kids in the neighborhood, and we all collected. But we all did a lot of things. We had skateboards were a fad for a while. Model building was a fad for a while. Comics was a fad that lasted a little bit longer. But everybody I knew that collected comics in my neighborhood, they're still not into comics, but I am. So I keep thinking my love of the art form, even as a kid, had a lot to do with me staying with it and staying passionate about it, and even pursuing it as a career.
And I'm so glad that you're mentioning this topic, because I've talked about it a lot. Like, maybe it's because we are that gap. Now, I collected a lot when I was a kid, which dates back to what you're saying. The late '70s for me.
Mhm.
And then I kind of like had the gap phase where I didn't really get into it too much in high school, maybe a little bit
Mhm.
here, a little bit there. Um, but it was really like right at the end in the late '80s. I always point to Batman '89 as being this big game changer for me, where I become like immersed, and it become almost like an obsession. Like it was just
Yeah.
years of just obsession. And
Yeah.
if you're doing any type of retail, which is what I was doing, I mean, like I said, I'm reading hundreds of books a month. Like it was just churning through so many different things. And it was one foot in reading, one foot in collecting, and one foot in juggling with investing. Like there was literally like
Right.
having a perspective, and some folks don't quite understand that perspective. And looking at it now, isn't it just shocking, like the value boosts of certain things? Like it's so crazy. Like we could go to shows, probably even 10 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. You could get original art. I could get, some of this OG golden age, just gems for, I mean, yeah, sure. Some of it was expensive relative to minimum wage, but not like now where it's like, the price of a neighborhood of houses.
Yeah, it's shocking. And in one hand, you kind of, if you're a collector, you like it because your value of your books are going up. But
Sure.
also, as a collector, you're like, the stuff I want to get, and now I can't get because it's too
Mm.
stinking expensive, right?
Yeah.
And I started going. Well, we had a show in Portland called uh, or pardon me, put on by a guy who I became friends with, Richard Finn, who used to be a distributor and different things, but he would put on the Portland comic book show, and we would go to that. I started going to that when I was in high school, right? So when I was old enough to drive 16, I would go to the shows, and they were. I mean, we had no other than the Comic Book Buyer's Guide, which was a newspaper, a weekly newspaper that came out. There was an industry newspaper, right? So it would have all these articles and stuff, but it would also have tons of advertisements for stuff that was coming out that maybe wasn't necessarily like something you'd find in a comic book spinner rack, but things like, Wrightson's Frankenstein portfolio, or
Mhm.
Barry Smith doing something, or an art book that was coming out by your favorite comic book artist that you wouldn't have any way of knowing about otherwise. And so we would go to these conventions with very little knowledge of what we would see. I mean, we knew we'd see old comics, but the original art, you had no idea what was going to be there.
Mhm.
I would always find, I was a big Wrightson fan growing up, and so I was always looking for the next thing that Wrightson was going to put out. And this was about the time that he was doing a lot of his own stuff through the studio
Mhm.
and Tyrannosaurus Press. So all the prints and the portfolios and the books, and there would inevitably always you'd see something at someone's table that you didn't even know existed.
Yeah.
Right now, that's with the internet, nothing shows up that we don't know about, right? Months
Right.
before it comes out. But back then, it was just so exciting to go to these conventions, or like I said, the old used bookstores that would have comics. You just had no idea what you were going to find. And sometimes you didn't even know what you were looking for, right? Because there was
Yeah.
stuff out there you'd never heard of or never been exposed to. And then you'd see like Silver Surfer #1 sitting there, and you're like, oh, who's this, kind of
Uh,
thing. And
yeah.
th- those are
You
my
see
fondest.
pictures you see pictures in magazines or those price guides, but you never actually saw them physically.
Right.
Actually, this came up in I did a comic talk with another comic book reviewer, Wakazashi Seahouse. His name is Gray. He's over in Japan, and we were talking about Ninja Turtles #1. I said people don't understand. There's only like 3,000 of the things that were made.
Mhm.
So you could live in an area, you just would not see them. You could go to
Right.
shows. It was just a law of numbers. They just were not here. So I
Right.
said the first one I was able to get, first off, I had to drive across town to the expensive comic shop to get certain ones. I had to save my money up to go get my, that's where they would have like Sandman #1, or that's where they had a Ninja Turtles #5. And I was saving and saving and saving, crossing my fingers. I was able to get a Ninja Turtle 5. I never saw another 1 through 4. I want to say for like 5 years or something. It was years until there was like a big MegaCon in like Orlando, and I was able to get like a 2 or a 3 or something there. And that one I
Right.
think I flipped within a couple days because someone locally was like, "Listen, I've not seen. I know you're not going to see this because I got it in Orlando. You're not going to find another one." And so yeah, it's just a different world, and it is hard to communicate that to people. Are you still shocked that some people don't get that? Like, because I mean, we're like 3 generations through this stuff. I don't know. I have
Well,
grandkids now, so I know they're not going to understand. But my own kids are like, I don't understand what you're talking about, Dad. Like, they don't get it.
well, my daughter doesn't really care, and my son does. And I raised him, on going to comic conventions with me. And, we would, as our storybook for a long period of time were those big Gerber cover, Marvel Comics covers. They have every cover of every Marvel comic in there, those big hard covers. And we would flip through those and see who the first appearance of who so-and-so was. So my son, who's now an engineer, he still collects, and he reads. He doesn't read any of the modern stuff. He reads the like Marvel Essentials and stuff. So he's reading the same stuff I read, when it came out. And so we have conversations about that kind of stuff. So he likes the older stuff and has never really got into the newer stuff. But yeah, so my daughter, though, it's just, she's even an artist, but it's just not her. I mean, she understands what's going on, but she doesn't care
It's not her thing. Yeah, I have
about it.
that too. I have that too. So,
Not in her wheelhouse,
well, we got to get to your comic because let me grab my, they're literally right here. Yeah, they're right here. So there's my
that's the
my
print.
Wraith of God print.
Yeah, the mini print
And
right
then
there.
my teaser for Blood Hunters, which is hopefully moving along just fine. So
Yes, it is.
talk about. I want to see. I don't. I don't even know. I want to tell you what I said in my review. So I'd like to hear what you have to say. How you describe Wraith of God to the normies, so to speak.
Well, I came up with an elevator pitch like you want to do, right? You want to be able to kind of get your idea across pretty quickly without boring people. You start telling them about every detail about the story, and they're like, But to me, it's basically he's like a Batman of the Old West. He has a partner named Esther, who is a former Salvation Army worker that sort of acts as his Alfred, although their relationship is what I would call bumpy, and they're monster hunters. He believes he's on a mission from God. We don't really know if he is or not. I mean, to quote the Blues Brothers, and so there's those kind of interesting dynamics going on between these characters as they're hunting down monsters. In the case of the first book, Wraith of God, the graphic novel, they're hunting down some werewolves, and in the America's Old West. So you're combining, monster movie elements, superhero elements, historical Western elements. So there's a lot of genres mashed in there that I think makes it kind of a unique read. Because if you're a monster fan, you'll like the book. If you're a superhero fan, or at least a superhero Batman type superhero fan, you're probably going to like the book. And if you want your stories with a little bit more heart to them than just a straight out adventure, I think you're going to like it. So there's a lot of stuff that I put into this to try and at least make it, I don't want to say unique, but interesting, to a wide variety of people, not just a particular genre, or a reader that's interested in a particular genre. I wanted to be able to this to appeal to more than just, like I said, a fan of horror comics, and that's all they buy is monster comics. Well, this is for you if that's what you do. But if you're a superhero fan, this is a book you might like as well, and some of the other elements as well. Like, you want adventure, you want some fantasy elements in there. They're all in there, and so and I'm a fan of all that stuff, right? So I don't know that I set out to make this, comic book stew, but it's just when you're a fan of different genres and things, and you start writing your own work, and that stuff, the stuff you're a fan of, starts to work its way in there, right? And
Mm.
it becomes part of this big stew, if you will, that I put together for this. Um, but I think you have, I have professional experience writing. I have professional experience, obviously, drawing comics for years. So I'm trying to put out a book that you would see from Marvel or DC in terms of quality. You wouldn't, it would fit right in with that. And but then also doing what I want to do as opposed to doing what they want me to do for the paycheck.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
there's a lot of different things that go into it, but that's my sales pitch, I guess. Really, is that I
No, I
think
think it's
it's
great. I think it's great. What is so when you first started the crowdfunding, you kind of had that first hit, right? Because you knew, oh crap, this is going to go. This is going
yeah.
to go. Oh my gosh. How far out have you written? Like how many volumes out or issues out? I don't know exactly how you view them.
Well, it's more like plot, um, rather than I've got the plot figured out.
Hmm.
I know where it's going and how it's going to end. Unlike, say, a television show like Lost, that had no idea where they were going. I always got
Right.
to get that in because that was the show that ruined TV for me. But I you can't go into something. I don't think go into something with no idea where you're going, because you can get yourself in a whole lot of trouble real quickly. And I always I went to film school, and so my training in writing is more on script writing and not episodic writing. Like,
Mm, right.
I would not say want to become a regular artist or regular writer on Spider-Man. But if you said, "Hey, can you write a Spider-Man miniseries?" Now you're talking, okay? Because I like to come up with my concept, where it's going, what's the moral of the story, what's the point of the story. Why am I doing this? What are people supposed to take away after they read this? Um, but I like to feel like a sense of closure at the end of it. Um, for Wraith of God, the graphic novel, the first one, um, the whole story is wrapped up, but it's not,
Right.
the adventure is not over. But that story is wrapped up, and it plays a little bit like, if it was going to be a 6 issue, actually it was intended to be a 4 issue miniseries when I first conceptualized it. But it was that story about the werewolves, and then it leaves
Right.
it open to go on to the next adventure. But I don't want things sort of just dragging along, and then
Mhm.
adding more elements. And then pretty soon you've got so many elements, and you're like, well, I didn't really figure out what I was going to do with all this stuff. And then you can't figure out how to tie them together. So my approach again is more finite in terms of storytelling, and but then leaving it open so that you can continue it with another adventure once this one's complete. And that's kind of how I write. So I know exactly where this is going and how it's going to get there. All the details aren't exactly figured out at this point, but I'll do that when I write the scripts for them. But I do know where I'm going, and how long it's probably going to take me to get there.
For those of you that are watching this, if you've heard me when I talk about like Mike Mignola and Hellboy, or you talk about Mark Millar, Millarverse, that kind of thing, it's the same thing, right? They're writing in a very contained story, and then those stories can thread together into this bigger universe. And it's easy. It's easier to point you to jumping in and finding things that you like and getting engaged with the characters and then falling in love with those characters to go on further adventures. Maybe there's adventures, let's say for instance, you can't get a copy of the first Wraith of God right now, but you can get Blood Hunters. Trust me, you're going to fall in love with those characters, and you're like, well, what are the other adventures? Well, there's at least this one. There's probably going to be another one coming. So you have that sort of sense of what Aaron's talking about. So I really, you cheated with me on Wraith of God because I knew I would like it, but I love like Jonah Hex and Ghost Rider,
Mm,
and that's how I felt when I was reading it. Like, wow, I'm watching like a Jonah. I'm watching. It plays in my head like a movie sometimes.
mhm.
Yeah, it's like Jonah Hex and Ghost Rider amalgam together in this universe, and I'm just like, wow, this is freaking amazing. And the irony was, I think because of this Werewolf by Night show that they did, I had gone back and read like Bloodstone stuff, and it was like the monster hunting stuff, and I was
Yeah.
like, oh, it was like such a sweet spot for me where it's taking me back to all that stuff. And I'm like an OG Universal Studios monsters guy. Like I
Yeah,
love
me
like the
too.
Karloff, and yeah, you guys have done whole streams on that kind of stuff. So for me, I share that love with that kind of stuff. I know Graham talks about this a lot. Graham Nolan talks about this a lot too. So it's great.
Now, did you pick up the Universal Monster references in Wraith of God?
I did. I did.
Okay.
I do. I think I bought like this massive packet of stuff. I had this giant box of stuff that came.
Well,
So yeah,
I referenced as many Universal Monster movies, at least with the Werewolf of London is one of my
yes.
favorite Universal Monster flicks. And we had a character in Wraith of God named Henry Hull, who was the actor who portrayed the werewolf in that movie. And also the museum curator was designed to look like Warner Oland, who was Charlie Chan, but he was also in A Werewolf of London as well. And so I had little things like that, little Clint Eastwood references, things like that, because
Oh yeah.
like I said, when you're a fan of that stuff, it's really hard to keep from like interjecting it into the story.
Well, it also
Paying attention.
it just becomes fun stuff. Like Graham was talking about one of his friends. He always gets, if he's doing the art, he draws his friend, and the friend always dies. It's like the death of
Yep.
Tom in every single issue. Those kinds of things. And I'm like, see, that's to me that's glorious, because especially when you're in on the joke or you're in on the inside thing, it makes it even more special to you. I just love that. So, but now that you're doing this, talk to the person that maybe they even are working on their comic, or I have become pretty close friends with somebody that's gotten through their first crowdfunded comic. They've gotten their like issue 0 off the ground. They got through their first. They've fulfilled their issue 0. Talk a bit about the transition to putting on like all of the different business hats, because now it's not Aaron who turns in a script or turns in his art. Now it's Aaron who runs the business, who has to he and Shelley have to pack and ship and do PR and do prep for the next thing and brainstorm, deal with all of these different. Talk a little bit about how did you transition into all of that?
Well, for me personally, it's something that I've always had an interest in, running my own business. And I even as a kid, before I broke in at Marvel and DC, like I was 18 years old, 19 years old, I had my own like characters, my own line of comics and this whole thing, right? And so I was calling like Sparta Printing in Illinois, which was the big printer for Marvel and DC back in the day, just getting quotes on how much does it cost to do this, and talking to people at distributors, and because I thought at some point, maybe I'll do this myself. So it was always something I wanted to do. And one thing I've done throughout my career in comics is produce like art books or sketchbooks or prints. And so I've always sort of had one toe in self-publishing, it just to a lesser degree, to a smaller, degree than what I'm having to do now. But that being said, going into this, I intellectually knew what I'd have to do, but didn't really have a clear idea of just how time consuming it really was. And I think you have to have a love of being in charge, or at least I don't know how I want to, like a love of responsibility,
I call it the
because
appreciation of independence.
yes, because you're going to have a ton of work and a ton of responsibility, but you got to be okay with that. And some people aren't, because there's a lot of pressure, but and you get frazzled, and you're kind of like, for example, when I got the book done, or when I was working on the book, I was really worried that I wasn't going to get it done in time when I said I was going to get it done, right? And with Indiegogo, they put you put a date in there for your campaign. It's like estimated
Mhm.
estimated uh, time of delivery or whatever for the product. And you're just guessing because you have no idea. I mean, you might know how long it's going to take you to actually draw the book, but that's only part of it, right? And so I was stressed out the whole time. I'm going to be late. I'm going to be late. I'm going to be late. And, so you have to, and so you put that pressure on yourself just as the writer, artist, the creator, right? And now you're an editor because, well, someone's lettering the book and it's not me. Someone's coloring the book and it's not me. Um, so I have to deal with those people back and forth with that. Then I got to get a designer who's going to put the book together for me. And we actually ran into some serious printing problems with Wraith of God. And then I had to deal with that with the printer and with some of the files weren't prepared correctly. And then trying to solve the problem of why these weren't printing the way they were supposed to print and whose fault was it and who can fix it and all those kinds of things that you don't even think about. And then you're doing your add-ons, or pardon me, your stretch goals, which are, maybe trading cards.
Mhm.
In my case, I did a playing card, which is very different than a trading card. And so you go one place to get cards printed up, printing playing cards, like I did with the Ace of Spades that came with as a stretch goal, and then your trading cards that have your different character, and maybe you're hiring a different artist to do. I had stickers as well, and I had a couple different artists help out. So now I got to pay them, and I got to make sure they get it done on time and it's done the way I want it. So all these different things, and they're all going on simultaneously. That's the thing. It's not like you just draw the book. Okay, now I'm going to be an editor for a month. Okay, now I'm going to be a production
Right.
manager for a month. Now I'm going to be a fulfiller for a month. You're doing all this stuff at the same time, and that's where it can get kind of hectic, and you can kind of get lost, in the shuffle and maybe drop the ball on something. And so those, you have to be very organized. And Shelley's very organized. I'm not, but she's taught me over the years how to be more organized and to take steps, just the simple things of writing a list down so you know what you're doing, what you're supposed to be doing. Um, but I enjoy it, even though it's very stressful. But I can see how a creative person that just wants to draw a comic, just wants to write a comic, just wants to do the coloring, whatever, don't want to deal with that hassle. And so it's something you have to take into consideration before you go into this, that you're going to be wearing multiple hats, and you have to be prepared for that because it is stressful and it is very time consuming. And then you throw into that your YouTubing, right, which you're doing for promotion and advertising. That's all part of it as well. And so how do I manage my time that I'm doing on camera versus the time I need to be drawing this book? Um, yeah, there's just it's it's
So
it's it's challenging.
you mentioned Shelley in the list. So is that how it works? Is there a paper list? Is there a spreadsheet list? Is there like action item report? I mean, how do you guys manage it? I didn't mean to get too nuts and bolts with you, but I think I've met different creators. I've met a couple who they're really overwhelmed with the fulfillment and promotion part. I've met
Mhm,
one that clearly is not real comfortable with the YouTube part. Like you can just tell that's not going to be their strong suit.
mhm,
I've seen some who, I'll say this: I still don't have my book, so it's like, wait a minute, you're getting caught up with the promotion part and the personality part, but you've lost your nuts and bolts with the deadlines and the goals for the actual product.
mhm.
So I tended to be a customer who may not want to come back because I'm like, well, but I never got the product. I mean, so how do you manage for lack of a better term, an action item list? Do you have something physical? Do you use a spreadsheet? How do you guys navigate that?
Well, there's two parts to this, right? There's the part of
Perfect.
just getting the thing done, and
Hmm.
then the part of getting it fulfilled, right?
Right.
And when we're in the process of um, putting the book together and getting all that stuff done, um, it's a I write stuff down on paper. I'm just that kind
Mhm.
of a guy. I'm not. Um, And then once I do that, I will, like, if I have to make a list, like I have people contact me fairly frequently that want, like, I don't want to cancel my order, but I want this added on. How do I do that? And I'm like, well, I'll make a list here so that when we're in fulfillment, I can double check the list and go, okay, this guy wanted this added on. He paid through PayPal, that type of thing. So I have a list. I just type it up,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Of specialty things like that. So and so wants their book signed.
Okay.
You know, um, this person wants this special request. And the difficult thing is remembering to check that list when you're shipping stuff out. And when we're shipping, okay, for example, um, I will make a budget list and I will go in and update it every month. Okay, so it's like, here's my printing estimate, here's my shipping estimate, here's what I know. I have got all these stretch goal cards that I have to have printed. How much is that going to cost me? Um, so my entire budget for the book, right? And then, okay, then how much of that now is left over for me, and how thin can I spread that? Because that's what you're using for your income when you're doing all this work, right? And so you don't want to blow through it and say, I'm going to spend $20,000 this month, and the next month you have nothing. So you have to be very protective of that nest egg of money that you get that's going to pay for printing and shipping, because those are musts, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
those are what
Mm-hmm.
the customer is going to get, and how you're going to get it to them. That is priority one. And anything left over, and you got to be very careful about that, because some of these are estimates. The printing prices change over time and sometimes very quickly. So I have all that stuff written down, and I go back in and say, okay, this is what I've got left. This is how much I still is going to come out of that much. Then how much is it left over for me? So how much of that can I take a month just to get by while I'm doing this other stuff? So all that stuff is typed up and written down and managed on a monthly basis. And that stuff's always that stuff I don't forget. The financial part you never forget, because you can just, that weight of that is always on you. And then when we get to fulfillment, we download basically a CVS file from Indiegogo or whatever your platform is that you're using. And Shelly then, because I'm not a technical person really at all, and so I'll let Shelly dumps that into a spreadsheet, right? So then we've got everybody what they ordered, and then we just go through and put like a line across people as we fill in the orders. But we had a glitch last time where some of the stuff, for whatever reason, did not get put into the shipped file. And so we double shipped books to people. It was probably 20 some different people, which doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal, but it is when you have, like, I had a sketchbook that was limited edition, and I only had so many copies. And some
Mm-hmm.
people got doubles of those. And I said, you can keep the extra Wraith of God book, but you got to ship me back that sketchbook, because that's going to somebody else. And
Yep.
so those are things, managing inventory, right? And I'm
Yeah.
always concerned about that stuff. So I'm always, like, when we were fulfilling, I would go back and I would count the books multiple times, because I kept feeling like I'm going to run out of books. I don't have enough books. I just had this feeling like I don't have enough books. I mean, I did, but you're counting boxes and you're saying, okay, there's 40 in each box. This is how many boxes I got. This is how many orders I have. And even when I was a third of the way through, a half the way through, I'd go back and check my numbers and make sure that I still had enough, then that something hadn't got screwed up. And then
And
when you get,
let me interject here
yeah,
too,
sorry.
because you were selling stuff through your website as well. So in the middle of all of this, you have inventory from Aaron Lopresti's past with different sketchbooks. There's a hardback book. There's all these different things that you had available as well. So you already have any inventory management and shipping processes that you're also trying to manage. That's in addition to the Indiegogo projects and all this other stuff too. So
Well, yeah, that's when you complicate things by adding stuff to your campaign. That is, like, we
mhm.
have shot glasses and we have
Yep.
t-shirts and we have beanies and baseball caps.
Yep.
Excuse me. In fact, the t-shirts are coming in like, I just got a notification from the printer that they're shipped. So they'll be here in a matter of days. And then, so I have like 200 t-shirt orders to fill. Now, those don't just get put off for 3 months. We start shipping those out when they get here. So now I've got to draw the book, YouTube, and ship product,
Hmm. Hmm.
while I'm managing all this kind of stuff. And it's just long days. I'm in a good position because my kids are out of the house. So I don't have kids that I'm driving around and things like that. If you have to do all this, and some people have a day job and they're doing all this and they have a family to manage at the same time, it gets really, really tough. But I
Well,
try
that's
to do everything immediately so it doesn't get forgotten.
it. And that's why I wanted your expertise. I want to make sure that we're paying it forward for other folks. And maybe it's not a comic book. Maybe it's just the concept of, an aspiration you have for this type of material or product or something like that is just to put in your mind the reality of how this works, and a respect that you should have for folks that are doing this, because you have to keep in your mind, you have a person that's on the internet and they're doing their little YouTube show talking about their comic book or whatever. And I see an awful lot of hate and whatever. And I'm like, man,
Mhm.
they got a family. They're shipping stuff. They're selling some stuff. They also have some stuff they're selling on eBay. They're doing a whole lot of moving parts so that this is their living. This is their job. This is their
Mhm.
company. I think
Well,
we
and
also
we
get
we
spoiled by that too, right? Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I think by updating your backers regularly, like I do it on Wraith of God, the first one I did it weekly, which I found was kind of a bit of an overkill. I think I ended up with like 80 some, updates over an 8-month period or something. And it's like, because sometimes I didn't really have new information, just like, but I'm doing it about every 2 weeks now, sometimes a week and a half, keeping people updated. And that way, if they know where you're at, if I say, okay, I'm on page 35, and then I said, oh, I'm on page 40 now. Oh, I'm on page 45. And they know this is a 100-page book, right? So they know, even if you then don't hit your exact date for shipping, and again, it is an estimated date, right? It's not a promise, it's an estimate and made a year prior, so, you know, and, but as long as the people know exactly where you're at, then it sort of eliminates this kind of, oh, I'm marking on my calendar like you're in a Turkish prison. This is the day I get out, it's, it's more like, oh, okay, we know where he's at. So they can go on the ride with you. And then when you're on page 60, they're like, oh, there's only 40 more pages to go. Oh, 80, only 20 more pages to go. 10. And they're not looking at the calendar saying, oh, he promised this 2 weeks ago, because they're right there with you and they know you're being transparent. You're being upfront with them. You're showing them pieces of art that you can without creating spoilers and ruining the book for them. And then I find most people are very accommodating, as long as you don't get ridiculous, like, you're a year later, 2 years later, things like that. But if you're a month later than what you thought you were going to be, or even in 2 months, as long as they know, like for me with Wraith of God, I put that book to the printer. I waited 2 months to get that book back.
Yeah.
And it's like, we don't have any control over that. So you just tell everybody, hey, it's at the printers. It's at the printers. I'll ship it as soon as I get it back. And you keep letting them know it's at the printers. And like you say, once people get the book in their hand, as long as you don't abuse that trust that you have with your backers, and they get the book and it's a product that they're really happy with, they're not gonna, they're not sending you hate mail, 6 months later, go, yeah, but I loved your book, but it was 2 months late or whatever. Um, so but like you said, you I wanted to also mention that when you're talking about YouTubing, the hardest thing about YouTubing is the negativity that you get inevitably, right? And Shelly we had some guys that were just making videos about her and in the negative light, you know, um, and so she was ready to quit and just say, I'm not going on your show anymore. She was so upset and ticked off at this. And you start to realize that, the more you do it, that's social media. There's just people out there that's just how they are. And you sort of take it with a grain of salt, and then it doesn't affect you anymore. People come in your chat, and I don't really have that problem because I'm not a controversial chat. I'm not, starting arguments with people and all that kind of stuff. But I take a lot of grief in my chat because people, and that's kind of set up to be that way, right? To give me a hard time everybody picks on Aaron kind of thing. And that's kind of the fun of it. But I know that's what's going on, and even if people were serious at this point, it's like on Twitter, right? Someone says something negative. You're like, go stick your head in the ground.
Yeah,
I just I don't have
go
time for
pound
this
sand.
nonsense,
Yeah,
right? You
go
don't
pound.
take it personal anymore.
Yeah.
And so that was the hardest thing, was getting past that point where we sort of really understood that, hey, you're in a very small sense, but a celebrity. And so therefore people are going to take shots at you just because of that, because you're on doing a show. You're a target. And once you understand that and realize that's part of it, then it's much easier to navigate that stuff,
Right.
and I never
Yeah.
took taken myself that seriously anyway. So, and when you realize that, people don't like you and it's not because something you've done, that's when I feel bad, right? If I've hurt somebody or done something or said something that offended somebody, and I don't mean, making a comment about, um, what's going on in society and people are offended by that. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying like a personal offense that you said something that hurt somebody's feelings or whatever. I feel bad about that. But when it's just people getting mad at you because they don't like your politics, or they're jealous of your success, and I put that in quotes because that's all relative. Um, that stuff just kind of you realize it just doesn't mean anything, because it's coming from, someone calling me a Nazi is absurd, right? And so it's like, that person's never met me. I had someone, a comic book professional, try to get me canceled out of a show I was going to, and I had more people defending me than I was defending myself. But I just said about the guy, I said, I don't know this person. I've never met him. He's never met me. So his opinion about me is meaningless, because he's making stuff up that he doesn't even know is true, because he doesn't know me, and I mean, that's just kind of how you have to look at it. And when you're able to kind of take that attitude, it hurts a lot less, when you suffer those slings and arrows.
Sure. The only power they have is the power that we give them. The only power they
Exactly.
have is the
It's
power
really
we give them.
true.
Yeah. So let me try to share this so folks can get a pretty good idea, and you can just talk through as we kind of scroll through. I can't play the audio and stuff like that because Lord knows they will copyright claim everything now. It's so
No, don't
freaking
worry about it.
ridiculous. It's insane. The links are going to be in the description, of course, folks. You'll have all the links to everything. I will be reaching out to Aaron to make sure I didn't miss any links and those kinds of things. So this is still active. You can see here at the top, over 2,000 backers now, 137,000. So it's rocking and rolling. You have all your information here about it. This massive 100-page comic that's coming your way. And over here, you have the different covers that you can get. You can get them individually. You can get some
Yeah, there's
bundles. There's
we have
bundles at the bottom. And
Simon Bisley did a cover for it, and
yeah, I want to
there's
get to
3
that one.
covers
That's
that
my
I did,
favorite. Yeah.
and that's a
Look
trading
at
card from
this.
Dan Lawless. Yeah, there's the Bisley cover there.
Wow. That's beautiful.
I actually bought the painting from him. It just showed up last week. It's an amazing,
Look at
amazing
Dan.
thing to sit there and hold it in your hands and look at it.
Look at Dan representing like a
Yeah.
boss.
So
Get
when
ain't
that
that Dan
hits,
back on
when the
again.
campaign gets to 140, that's a free card for everybody. Um, and I tried to do covers that were, I think the trick, again, a little bit inside baseball.
I love that.
If you're doing covers, if you're doing multiple covers, don't have, even if you have different artists, if they all look relatively the same, then you're not incentivizing your audience to buy more than one cover. So I go out of my way to make sure my covers are vastly different, even if I'm drawing all of them. Um, so you have more of a chance that people will be interested in going, well, I got to have these two, but if they all look the same or are generally the same, then they just pick, well, I'll take that one. And, you know, um, not
Man,
that
that
you want your thing totally dependent on selling multiple covers, but, you want to put that option out there to give you a chance to raise more money, certainly.
your Nosferatu is really impressive.
Oh,
Man,
thank you.
serious. Yeah. Um, there's your backup story art. Look at
Yeah,
this
I've got
guy.
that's the thing about
So
this
awesome.
book is there's 3 different backup stories. One is the Garbage Man stuff that you're looking at here that Dan Lawless will be coloring. Kit Carter is the other one. It was my humorous 50s sci-fi send up. Um, and then the Nightclub, which is a set of characters that appeared in the Garbage Man graphic novel that was originally published through Dark Horse. So those characters have their own solo story as well. So there's the Wraith of God story, which is 53 pages, and then we have three other backup stories featuring other characters from the Lopresti verse, if you will. And I thought it was the best way to get more of my characters out there without people having to wait a year for every single issue to come out, right? But it's a lot of work. 100 pages. I probably never do this again because it's I didn't charge anymore for the book. It's still what you would get for if you got a 48-page book or a 64-page book, whatever people are doing. It's $25, but you're getting a 100-page book, all new material in it. So I think it's a real good value.
Well, not only that, I'm pulling up the 120 one. So for 120 and $10 for shipping, $10 for shipping is like criminal. I'd say it's insane. There's no way he's making money on $10 for shipping. Signed all 3 covers, the Garbage Man mini print, the roughs, the Save from the Trash, which I think I have 2 copies of that. I was going to give it away and I just didn't give it away yet. So yeah, there's tons of stuff in here to pick from, folks. So make sure you check out that link, find out something for you, man. Let's get this rocking and rolling in the home stretch here. That's so much fun, Aaron. I appreciate that so much. It's been great. So,
thank you.
All right, so folks, we're going to talk about a couple things behind the paywall here. So if you're not a member, you're going to miss out. So make sure you go become one of my little Pops mods and jump into the old Pops verse and hang out with us. I'm going to tease. I'm going to ask him a little bit more about Bernie Wrightson, and I'm going to ask him about his famous John Landis situation, which made me laugh out loud when I was hearing about John Landis. So yes, he's snickering because I know these stories because I watch his channel. So yeah. So if you're not a Pops member, you need to do that so you can catch this video that will be behind there. So, but thanks to Aaron. Thanks for you guys hanging out with us doing Comic Talk. Hope you're enjoying Comic Book Wednesdays, and just good luck to Aaron and his team, Shelly, and everybody doing these things, and all the independent creators. And again, put your comments in there, reach out, let us know information about what you want us to talk about, questions you might have. We'll pass along to Aaron and his team, that kind of thing. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you guys so much. I'm Pops.
Thank you.